My name is Marian Pierce, and at 62, I thought I understood every kind of silence life could hand me. But nothing prepared me for the one that waited outside St. Andrew's Church in Charleston, the silence that comes when the world moves on without you. The spring air was thick with jasmine, and the church bells were ringing like they meant celebration. I stood at the bottom of the steps in a navy dress that fit a little too tightly across the waist, holding a pale envelope I had written, "For Clara and Evan," in my neatest handwriting. My daughter was getting married. I had imagined this moment 1,000 ways, her face glowing, my arms full of flowers, both of us laughing. Instead, when the doors opened, she stepped out. Clara looked radiant, almost unreal, wrapped in white lace that shimmered against the light, her lips curved. Not in joy, but in control. "Mom," she said quietly, "we already have enough guests inside." For a second, I thought I had misheard her. I smiled, waiting for the laugh that would follow. It never came. Behind her, Evan Monroe adjusted his cufflinks and gave me a thin, satisfied grin. The suit he wore was one I had paid for custom wool, two-piece, charcoal gray. It fit him perfectly, like the life my money had bought. "I paid for this wedding," I managed to say. My voice was soft, steady, but my hands trembled against the envelope. Every part of it. "Clara," her eyes darted toward the guests behind her. "Please, Mom, not here." Something in me gave way, not loudly, not in anger, but in a small, deliberate crack that no one else could hear. I turned, heels tapping against the old stone steps, each click marking the distance between who I was and who I had just become. When I reached my car, the gift envelope still in my hand, I set it on the passenger seat. The sunlight through the windshield blurred the ink of my daughter's name. That night, long after the music must have faded from the church, I picked up my phone and called the bank. 2 days before the wedding, my phone buzzed just as I was pinning the last hem on my dress. The screen lit up with Clara's name. I almost smiled, thinking she wanted to share some small joy before her big day. Instead, when I answered, her face filled the screen beside Evan's. They were sitting close together on a pale sofa I had never liked, the kind that looked too expensive to touch. "Hi, Mom," Clara began, her voice careful, rehearsed. "We just wanted to talk about Saturday." Evan leaned in, polite but distant. "There's been a change with the seating. The venue's a little tighter than expected." I set my sewing aside. "Tighter?" he nodded, fingers steepled like he was explaining a business deal. "We've had to invite a few additional guest clients of my father's. Important people." Clara smiled too quickly. "So, we were thinking it might be better if you came for the ceremony only. The reception will be crowded." For a moment, I couldn't speak. The words floated between us, fragile and cruel. I managed to nod. "I understand." Her shoulders eased, relieved that I wasn't making a scene. "It's not personal. Mom, we just want the evening to run smoothly." Behind her, I noticed a garment bag hanging from the door, ivory satin, the gown I had paid for in full. The florist, the musicians, the caterer, every detail had my fingerprints on it. I had spent $200,000 creating a celebration I wouldn't be allowed to stay for. Clara's voice broke through my thoughts. "You'll have a wonderful view from the front row. It'll mean so much just seeing you there." When the call ended, I sat for a long time, the quiet heavy around me. My reflection stared back from the darkened phone screen, gray hair brushed neatly, eyes lined from years of work and worry. I thought about all the times I had stayed late at the shop to pay for her dreams and how, little by little, I had disappeared from the picture she was painting of her new life. The morning after that call, I opened my shop on King Street the way I had for almost 3 decades. The bell above the door chimed. The same soft note that had greeted me since the first day I rented the space. The air smelled faintly of starch and warm cotton. I turned on the machines one by one, their low hum filling the silence that had followed me home the night before. I started this place when Clara was 5. Back then, I was still learning how to breathe again after Robert's accident. One moment we were choosing paint colors for the nursery. The next, I was a widow with a toddler and a stack of unpaid bills. I left my job at the hotel laundry and took a loan from a neighbor, enough to buy 2 second-hand washing machines. I scrubbed, pressed, and folded until my fingers split. Over the years, the shop grew. I took in uniforms from the college, linens from restaurants, and wedding dresses from women who still had dreams to wear. I saved every spare dollar for Clara's education, kept every receipt in neat envelopes labeled with her name. When she earned her acceptance letter to the University of North Carolina, I framed it like a trophy. I used to think my hands told the story of my success calloused, scarred, but steady. They built a life out of soap and steam. Every mark felt like proof that I had done something right. Now, as I stood behind the counter, I looked down at those same hands and barely recognized them. The skin was thin and dry, the veins more visible, the nails short from habit. These were the hands that had bought a wedding I would not attend. I rubbed a bit of lotion into them, though it didn't help much. The scent of lavender rose from my palms, clean but hollow, like something that used to mean comfort and no longer did. The engagement party had been held 3 months earlier at the old Exchange Hall, one of Charleston's grand relics from another century. I had never set foot inside before. Its marble floors gleamed, its chandeliers shimmered like captured sunlight, and every conversation carried the same polished ease that money buys. I arrived early, holding a bowl covered with foil. It was my potato salad, the same recipe Clara used to beg for on her birthdays. The security attendant looked uncertain when I handed it over, as if homemade food didn't belong in a place like that. I left it on the catering table anyway, hoping it might remind her of home. When Clara saw me, she smiled the way people smile in photographs, controlled, symmetrical, professional. "Mom, you didn't have to bring anything," she said softly. "Everything's being handled. It's all professionally catered." I felt the heat rise in my face. "It's just something small," I murmured. But she was already guiding me toward a circle of well-dressed strangers. "Everyone, this is my mother," she announced. "Not Marian, not Mrs. Pierce, just my mother." As if the title were enough, the women nodded politely before returning to their conversations about vineyards, renovations, and travel. During the toasts, the host raised a glass to Evan's family for providing the venue and making this dream possible. Applause filled the hall. No one mentioned the florist, the band, the deposit checks, or the countless invoices that had passed through my hands. I clapped with the others, though my palms ached with the memory of every dollar I had sent. Later, when the crowd had thinned, Clara leaned close to me, her perfume sharp and unfamiliar. "Mom," she whispered, "please don't talk about money tonight. It makes people uncomfortable." I nodded because arguing in that moment would have made her uncomfortable too. She kissed my cheek lightly before walking away, leaving the faint trace of lipstick and the sound of laughter that no longer included me. 3 days before the wedding, I was sorting through receipts at the dining table when the doorbell rang. The late afternoon light slanted across the room, catching on the neat stacks of papers I had been organizing for weeks. I opened the door to find Nora standing there, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her dark hair damp from the drizzle outside. "I was in the neighborhood," she said, smiling the way only 19-year-olds can, half defiance, half care. "Aunt Marian, you look tired." I stepped aside to let her in. "Just trying to make sense of everything," I said. Her eyes moved to the table, rows of invoices, printouts, and payment confirmations covered the surface like a second tablecloth. She walked closer and scanned the top sheet. "Is all this for the wedding?" "Most of it," I answered quietly. "The venue, the flowers, the gown, the catering." She pulled out a chair and sat down. "That's a lot." "Almost $200,000, I said, surprised at how flat my voice sounded. Every cent meant to give her something beautiful. Nora's expression changed. She hesitated, tracing a line down one of the papers. "Aunt Marian," she began slowly, "I need to tell you something." I looked up, her voice lowered. "Last week I was dropping something off at Clara's apartment. They didn't know I was there. I heard her talking to Evan. She said, 'After the wedding, we won't need her anymore.'" The words landed like small stones against glass. For a moment, I couldn't move. I just looked at the receipts, the neat columns of numbers that had measured my love so precisely. "Maybe she didn't mean it," Nora said softly. "Maybe she did," I replied. I gathered the papers into one stack, aligning the corners carefully. My hands didn't shake. When I finished, I placed them in a folder and closed it with a quiet click. It was the sound of something final, something that no longer needed proof. That night, I couldn't sleep. The folder with the invoices sat on the table like a witness. The house was silent except for the sound of rain against the windows. Steady and deliberate. Around midnight, I turned on the lamp and opened the folder again. The last check lay on top. Already written out $28,750. It was meant for the final payment to the venue. I read my name on the corner, then Clara's handwriting where she had once helped me balance the books in the shop. The loops of her letters looked softer then. I reached for the phone. My hand didn't tremble. When the voice on the other end answered, I spoke clearly. "I need to stop payment on a check," I said. "Amount $28,750. The woman hesitated. "May I ask the reason?" "Ma'am, the services it was meant to pay for are no longer required." There was a pause, the faint click of keys being pressed, and then confirmation. "It's done," she said. After I hung up, I sat for a while in the quiet. The air felt lighter, as if a door had opened somewhere inside me. I placed the canceled check back into the folder and slid it into a drawer. The act felt clean, final. The next morning, I drove to the law office that had handled Robert's estate years ago. The receptionist still remembered me. She led me to the same small conference room with the same faint smell of old paper and coffee. When Patrice Keller, my lawyer, entered, I told her exactly what I wanted. I'd like to establish an education trust. I said, for my niece, Nora Pierce. It needs to be irrevocable. The funds should cover tuition, housing, and books only. Patrice studied my face for a long moment before nodding. "We can do that." By noon, the documents were signed and the funds had been transferred. I left the office with no papers in my hands, nothing to show for what I'd done. And yet, for the first time in a very long while, I felt the weight lift. The morning of the wedding broke clear and bright, the kind of Charleston day made for photographs. I parked a block away from the church, the same white-columned building I had once pictured as the backdrop of a joyful memory. Instead, it waited like a stage set for a play I no longer belonged to. I walked in through the side door just before the ceremony began. The air inside was cool, filled with the faint scent of lilies and perfume. Music drifted from the string quartet I had hired months earlier. I found an empty seat near the back, close enough to see but far enough to be unseen. Guests whispered softly, admiring the flowers and the gown as Clara entered on her father-in-law's arm. She looked stunning, and for a fleeting moment, I felt the familiar swell of pride. Then her gaze caught mine. The smile faltered, only slightly, but enough for me to see the flash of alarm beneath it. Evan followed her line of sight. When he noticed me, His lips curved into a thin, disdainful grin. He leaned toward her, his voice low but sharp enough to carry. Trash always finds a way in. I rose from my seat. The music faltered for a breath. My voice came out steady, not loud but clear. "You're wearing my money," I said softly. "Now wear the truth." For a moment, no one moved. The guests turned, uncertain whether they had just witnessed a scene meant for them. Clara's bouquet trembled in her hands. Evan's smirk slipped. I turned toward the aisle and began walking. Each step light, deliberate. The sunlight outside poured through the doors, blinding and warm. When I crossed the threshold, the sound of the quartet began again behind me, distant and hollow. By the time I reached the street, the air had shifted. The bells were ringing again, but I no longer felt their weight. I kept walking until the music faded, until all that remained was the quiet rhythm of my own steps. 6 months passed before I saw Clara again. The air had turned cooler by then, carrying the scent of salt from the harbor. My apartment overlooked a quiet street, a small place with peeling paint and sunlight that moved slowly across the walls. I had grown used to the calm, the kind that doesn't need anyone else's permission to exist. That morning, a knock came at the door. When I opened it, Clara stood there with Evan beside her. She looked different, tired, hair pulled back carelessly, eyes ringed with sleeplessness. In her arms was a baby wrapped in a pale blue blanket. "This is Robert," she said, her voice soft. "After Dad." The baby stirred, tiny fingers curling against the fabric. My chest tightened, not with anger, but with something heavier and quieter. "Can we come in?" Evan asked. I stepped aside. They sat on the couch, both of them too upright, as if the cushions might swallow them whole. The silence stretched until Clara spoke. "We're struggling, Mom. His job hasn't been steady, and my parents have stopped helping. We just need a little support until things even out." I studied her face, the same face I had loved through every stage of her life, now lined with the consequences of choices I hadn't made. "I can see you're trying," I said, "and he's beautiful." I looked at the baby again, then back at her. "I'll love you, Clara, always." But my wallet is closed. Her mouth opened, then closed again. Evan looked away, his jaw tight. "Mom, please," she started, but I shook my head. "You brought him here hoping I'd fold, but I can't be the same woman who paid for everything and stood outside the door." I stood, walked to the entrance, and opened it. They rose slowly, gathering the blanket around the baby. I watched them step into the hallway, their voices fading down the stairs, the door closing behind them with a soft click that felt, for once, like peace. 5 years passed before I heard from Clara again. By then, the laundromat had been sold, and the apartment had become my small world of quiet routines. Mornings began with tea by the window, afternoons with short walks along the harbor. I had stopped counting the months since that last visit, stopped waiting for her name to appear on my phone. One afternoon, the mail slid through the slot with a soft sound. Among the bills and catalogs lay a white envelope with my name written in careful, familiar handwriting. I knew it before I opened it. The paper trembled only slightly in my hands. Inside was a single sheet. The first line began simply, "Mom, I don't expect forgiveness. I finally see how I used you. How easy it was to take what you offered and call it love. Evan is gone. He left 2 years ago. I've been in therapy since then, trying to understand what I became. My therapist said love without respect is just manipulation in prettier words. I think I understand that now. I'm not writing to ask for anything. I just hope you're happy. I hope you're free." There was no address, no phone number, just her signature at the bottom, small and unsteady. I read it twice, then folded the paper along its crease. In the living room, I opened the drawer of my old desk and placed the letter beside a faded photograph of the two of us at her high school graduation. In that picture, she was smiling, leaning into me as if the world were still ours to share. I closed the drawer gently and rested my palm on the wood for a moment. The sun had started to set, spilling a soft light across the floor. I stood there until the room grew still again, feeling not sadness, but a quiet kind of understanding. It was not forgiveness. Not yet. But it was something close. Spring returned to Charleston slowly that year, with mornings full of sea air and the soft hum of gulls circling over the harbor. I had bought a small clay pot from a crafts market, uneven and a little crooked, the kind that bore the imprint of the hands that shaped it. It reminded me of myself flawed, but still holding. I filled it with soil one afternoon and pressed a few marigold seeds into it. They were bright orange in the package, almost defiant, a color that didn't ask for permission to exist. I placed the pot on the railing of the balcony outside my bedroom and waited. Every morning, I watered them with the same quiet care I used to give my linens. My hands had changed. The deep cracks that once came from soap and heat had softened over time, replaced by new lines gentler, but still honest. When I touched the soil, it felt warm and forgiving. One morning, as the light poured over the city, I stepped outside with my cup of tea. The marigolds had bloomed overnight, their petals open to the wind. The sun hit the flowers and reflected against the white wall behind them, washing the room in gold. For a moment, the entire space seemed alive. I thought of Robert, the grandson I had never held, of Nora, now sending postcards from college, of Clara, somewhere out there trying to build a life from the ruins of our silence. The ache that used to live behind my ribs had softened into something else: acceptance, maybe even grace. I leaned over the pot, brushing a petal with my finger. The marigold bent, but didn't break. This time, I whispered, I built something just for me. The wind carried the scent of the sea and earth together. I stood there, breathing it in as the sunlight moved across the balcony, touching everything it could reach.